Hello everyone, Raoh here, and today I'm going to be debunking Death Battle's Jotaro versus Kenshiro. While this Death Battle is a bit old, I did want to give a new perspective on the side of Fist of the North Star, as the debunks I watched on this specific video more so looked at Jojo rather than Fist of the North Star. It also bugged me to know that 4.4 million people watched it, and a significant portion of these people are now thinking what Death Battle has said is true. And I'll also be talking about Seth's video and talk about his coverage on this debunk as well. While I thought his debunk was great, I definitely don't agree with what he had to say on the Kenshiro side of things, so I thought it would be fun just to cover it as well. Just a note, this year, I will not be going over anything relating to Jojo scaling, as in I have not scaled or even know much about the series, so I don't think it would be very interesting if I gave some random speculation and disagreed or agreed on certain things that I have no idea what I'm talking about. So let's first go over the Death Battle, since that's the center point of the topic of this video. In this video, they mix up the canonicity a lot and use a lot of material from episodes or OVAs that just aren't canon. They display some techniques Kenshiro uses on Colonial, however, that arc is uncanon, and it's weird to use techniques from something that isn't canon and has little to no relevance in the future arcs. I think the video would have been better if they showed Kenshiro using some key manipulations, summoning the God of War, and other techniques. I also just want to point out I have no idea where they got the 333% from Tenryu Kokuo Ho, as they claimed on their little screen. I've looked up in guidebooks and some statements on this technique, and I've asked some friends even. They have no idea where this has even came from, nor did I find anything that supports this 333% increase. They even say in the video that it increases his power to the full 100%, while in base he was already using 30%. 70% doesn't really equate to 333%, so I have no idea where they got their math even. Even then, it's a bit sus, because why would going your full limits have a 66.6% difference in that when it's 333%? The math just doesn't add up, and I have no idea where that number came from. They also give a little inaccuracy on the Musou Tensei. They bring up the time that Kenshiro unlocked it against Raoh. I know this because they show that little scene where Raoh is punching and then Kenshiro dodges. However, that's not even perfected in Musou Tensei and is not at all saying anything about Kenshiro's full abilities. They also say one which no Grandmaster has unlocked. While that is wrong, because we know that Kenshiro Kasumi unlocked the full power of Hokuto as stated by the Taoists and absorbed the statue. It's even possible that Shuken unlocked this as well, as he was the original Hokuto user that experienced some heavy trauma in his life. That isn't confirmed though, but it's still a possibility. But yeah, I have no idea where they got this info from, and it seems like they did 2 minutes of research on like Hokuto Wiki, and then they thought they knew what they were talking about. When it comes to Feats, they were hilariously bad to such a degree I couldn't stop laughing for like 5 minutes. In their little Feats screen, they say Kenshiro defeated Nagato, Toki, Kaio, and Raoh. I have no idea where they even get the idea that Nagato even fought on screen or panel. Like, Nagato's only feat is charging against Hyo, and then he gets completely destroyed. That's literally it. He has no fights with Kenshiro and no fights at all. I think they meant to say Han there because they kinda look similar. However, I do think it's sad that they mistake such a minor character in Nagato and think that is one of the big villains of Hokuto no Ken. I also have no idea where they got the idea that Kenshiro fought Toki. Toki never fought Kenshiro. Maybe you can say they sparred during like the Medicine City arc or something. But I think what they were trying to say again is Amoeba, who pretends to be Toki, which it's sad if they don't get something that is as blatant as that's not Toki, that's Amoeba, when Rai states that. And then Amoeba gives his backstory on his encounter with Toki. Like, that's somehow thought of as, well, Kenshiro beat Toki in their mind, which just doesn't make any sense. It's very stupid, and it shows they have no idea what they're talking about. It's also weird that they bring up fights that don't actually happen and then ignore some of the biggest fights in the series. Like, they failed to mention Kenshiro versus Souther, Ken versus Hyo against Falco, etc. And it's made even weirder by the fact that they bring up Kaio, and I think attempted to bring up Han's battle as well on their screen, but they don't bring up any other feats or battles from Hokuto no Ken 2. The feats on the screen are also very low, like very low standards for Kenshiro, especially Prime Kenshiro. They bring up 50 punches within 30 seconds, which is a low ball, as there's people that Kenshiro scales above, like Souther. Souther is stronger than Hui, and Hui has statements that his fists have no shadow, which can be FTL. Even then, there's statements of Han as well having some FTL feats as well. So this random subsonic, thought to be speed feat is just not even a milestone and was never even a milestone. Touching lava with bare hands doesn't really mean anything either, unless you're saying Kenshiro's pain tolerance is high or something, which is kind of weird because Kenshiro's tanked like attacks from people that have scaled to people during nuclear warfare, and they've been around that. Throwing a 661-pound man is pretty retarded and is not a feat, especially when you take into consideration he bullied the demon in like the first 15 episodes. That was larger than some buildings even, and that's just not that big of a milestone either for Kenshiro, which is so weird that they put that even in. Breaking 10 tons of something again is just such a lowball when you consider the fact that these characters have caused country level attacks at like very little key. Take Raoh for example when he's about to die, and there's some calcs on that as well I can put in the description. I don't understand what the previous feats were for when they're like putting next feats after that. So like they're putting previous feats, but then like almost immediately after that they're putting feats that easily outdo what they've previously have done, which is just so weird to me. Like they bring up carrying a 200-ton boulder, which is much more impressive than breaking 10 tons of something. Hitting bullets in midair is just lowball as throwing 10 punches with 3 seconds. And again, I don't know why they put feats and outdo feats that they've already mentioned, like the 100 tons collapsing on Kenshiro is way more impressive than carrying a 200-ton boulder. But all these feats are just irrelevant and they just do not speak for what Kenshiro can do at his peak. They talk about Kenshiro one-shotting a building and walk through it. The problem with this feat is that it isn't canon. This feat comes from the 1986 movie, which is just a fun retelling of events in a different order for a fun cinematic feel. I don't think there's issues of showing techniques and certain displacements of what occurs in the movie as long as it's backed up of course. But in this case it's just irrelevant and it's not even canon. I don't even see why this is relevant to peak Hokuto no Ken conversations either. They end up just wrapping up with Kenshiro with some tank feats and then calling it a day with Kenshiro, which is just retarded. They don't even mention scaling characters or scaling off characters' feats, nor do they talk about Kenshiro's fights at all. It would have been interesting if they had talked about the fight against Kaio and they scale off of some of Kaio's feats and some of the previous feats that the series has had. They can then show how much stronger those two are compared to those feats. But instead they settle with lava scaling and how a tank explosion is peak verse strength. For the speed side of things, they could have addressed some statements or even scaled off of characters where by the end of the series you easily have FTL feats, possibly infinite speed if not higher levels as well if you scale off of events from Souten, but that's not quite necessarily for this. That's pretty much it for this specific video. I do think they just really did Kenshiro dirty here and they had no idea what they were talking about. Almost everything they said was wrong or was a lowball in some way, shape, or form. But from here, let's talk about some things they claimed on their podcast. Now on the podcast, they said a lot of wrong things about Jojo. However, like I said earlier, I'm not going to focus on that. Instead, I'm going to focus more on what they claim for Hokuto no Ken here. But they do claim some things in this video and they're just wrong. They first talk about Musou Tensei and they attempt to describe two versions of it, but fail to describe the differences and what each form does. I have no idea what they're trying to say here. They're distinguishing why one form can't use a Musou Tensei technique, and it's really weird. All I needed to do was touch up on what mastered Musou Tensei can do, not the one that Kenshiro gets when he fights Raoh, and then he goes in with his first round against Kaio later on. In this, they also kind of expose themselves for not being able to answer their own questions. That in this example, someone asks if Kenshiro can summon people from the afterlife, and then they answer with a little shrug and I don't know. I just thought it was funny to point out. It just shows they do very little research and that's it, and they try to sweep it under the rug, but I don't know where they even got the idea that he can just summon people from the afterlife, unless you take some events from Souten, but that's a little contentious as well. They also somehow bring up Naruto in this as well. I think they were like giving an example of why their death battle is correct here. And they bring up Naruto and they claim that Naruto fought someone when he was blind, which was just hilarious. I just think it's hysterical because it just shows how much like they care for the research and why they shouldn't be taken as a credible source, as some people label them out to be. Also, just to add, they explain canonicity pretty terrible, and their idea of another story making something canon and not canon is just a dumb distinguishment. Just some of those things to point out in their video, though I thought all of these points would just prove Death Battle has no idea what they're talking about and no one should be taking these guys seriously. Now, some people I talked to on this specific death battle had wanted me to address what Seth had said on what Kenshiro and Fist of the North Star in his video. When I went to go watch this, what he had said was pretty funny, but let's go over it. Seth first brings up the 1,000 ton durability feat and claims it is a lowball, which is totally true, and I agree it is a lowball. But what he says to support this is weird. He says that the scene is anime filler, which it isn't. That takes place in the movie, so it's not even anime or manga. He also questions if the anime of Fist of the North Star is even canon, in which there's very little that isn't canon. There's some characters that get added in the anime or replaced, like Shino and Jask, but in the anime they're Taiga and Bolts. But there are events in both the manga and anime, so there is some canonicity to the anime, and there's some uncanonicity to the anime as well. He also says it's hard to prove that the anime is even canon, in which it's not. You can literally pull up a side-by-side comparison on the manga and anime. There's even anime filler lists out there, etc. So I have no idea what he's trying to say here. Seth then brings up tanking nuclear bomb scaling, and he says, and I quote, scaling off of Raoh, who's way stronger than them, and Kenshiro, who was able to beat, Raoh with 30% power, end quote. So first let's talk about this statement. I don't know who Raoh scales to that has tanked nuclear bombs. Ryuken Toki was outside during the nuclear holocaust, and you can argue they tanked all of the bombs, which that is valid to both Ryuken and Toki, but Raoh then fights sick and weakened version of both characters. Even though I do think scaling off of other characters, nuclear bomb feats is still what sick Ryuken and Toki can easily output. The weirdest part to this though is he addresses this as if it's supposed to be like super big of a feat, which Kenshiro scales way past Raoh at his peak, so why this is supposed to be Kenshiro's peak is really weird to me. I also want to say, I don't know where 30% comes from. That is very strange to me, especially when they were like swapping hands in Musou Tensei, both Kenshiro and Raoh, and that's their strongest form at the time. The next part confused me when he had brought up Jing. I literally Google searched that and found out nothing. I think he meant to say Jin from Souten Oken, but that's not even from the same manga, and I don't even remember a single feat Jin performs, which just shows you how irrelevant he was. Seth then talks about how Raoh created a supercell cloud. Now, the first scan he sends is correct of Raoh sending his energy to the sky, and then he creates a hole in the clouds. But then he shows the scan of the windstorm created on the water in the initiation ritual in Souten, which again is not even in the same manga, so I don't know where he got the impression that Raoh was even behind this feat. Seth then talks about speed and says Kenshiro has casually slapped out thousands of pressure points on a panel before. However, the scan he shows during this is Hyo when he's using his 1109 pressure point attack on Black Yakusha, which he doesn't even explain why that scales to Kenshiro. Kenshiro does scale to this, as in the next panel after Hyo's attack, he casually grabs all the hands and blocks the attack, which is impressive, but Seth doesn't explain that part of the scaling. Seth then brings up how Kenshiro manages to hit Zongwu, and he then says that is subsonic to hypersonic speed. Problem with this though is, again, this feat is completely irrelevant to Kenshiro, as he's bringing up a whole different Kenshiro from a different manga. Like, it's still the same franchise, but Kenshiro's adoptive uncle named Kenshiro are not the same people. The calculations behind this feat are also massively lowballed, as later on, FTL isn't even a milestone. There's lightning statements, lightning speed statements, etc. So this again is just a weird argument to bring up, because he's just assuming Kenshiro is like speed of sound in this fight. After that, Seth then calls it a day and gives his analysis on the fight itself. Overall though, just not at all accurate and is arguably just as questionable as Death Battle here. Now I will say, I'm not holding Seth to the Fist of the North Star scaler. Like, he's never talked about the series before and he's never scaled it. It would be rude to hold him to his standard. It's also pretty obvious he just did a bit of research just to debunk Death Battle on what they had said, which is totally fine, but is also inaccurate. It is definitely sad that with a less amount of time, Seth can come up with a much more convincing argument and debunk a series he's never seen before, while Death Battle takes like a month and they perform horribly. Anyways guys, thank you for watching today's video. I always enjoy making these kinds of videos as they're fun and they still allow me to scale. If you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure to hit like and subscribe if you already haven't. Feel free to tell me if you want to see more videos like this in the future. And yeah, have a good one guys, till next time.